Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. On behalf of the Charlie Steiner School of Sports Communication, its administration, its faculty and staff, and our students, we welcome you to this seminar, and I don't think we have too much of a reach to say that there's never been at Bradley University an assemblage of sports broadcasting talent than we have for this panel today, and I mean ever. So we are glad that they're here. Think of some good questions, because they're going to impart information, and you can only get that from this type of assemblage here. First of all, at my far right, your far left, is John Rooney. John is a native of Richmond, Missouri, so he's a Missourian. Chicago Bulls, Missouri Tigers, CBS Radio, ESPN Radio, working the NFL, National Basketball, college football, Major League Baseball, which includes the Minnesota Twins, the Chicago White Sox in a World Championship season, and 2 with the St. Louis Cardinals, where he presently is employed. A member of the Missouri Valley Conference Network, so we see him at Carver Arena often, and a 2004 inductee into the Missouri Hall of Fame. Please welcome John Rooney. It's been a big year for Len Kasper. You can see all of the blue here. Marquette University grad, summa cum laude. Yes, sportscasters can be intelligent. WTMJ in Milwaukee, the Brewers, the Marlins, the Cubs in 2005, and a world championship this year. Please welcome a guy that knows a lot about music, Len Kasper. John Miller, 2010, the winner of the Ford C. Frick Award. That means he is a member of Major League Baseball and Baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Grew up a Giants fan in Hayward, California. His big league career began at the age of 23 when he worked with the world champion Oakland A's. He worked in the NBA, National Hockey League, and college basketball. Been the voice of the Texas Rangers, the Boston Red Sox, the Baltimore Orioles in a world championship season. Sunday Night Baseball's voice on ESPN from 1990 to 2010 with his partner, another Hall of Famer, Joe Morgan. In 1997 to this day, he is the voice of the San Francisco Giants, several Hall of Fame awards, including the NSSA Hall of Fame, and 2-time ACE Award winner, the one and only John Miller. And frankly, the reason we're all here. 1971 graduate of Bradley University, went from here in Peoria, WIRL, Quad Cities, New Haven, notice Hartford, Cleveland, New Jersey Generals, New York Jets, ESPN, as you heard in the last hour, he led us all to freedom. The Yankees, and now his beloved Los Angeles Dodgers, where he's been since 2005, working with Rick Monday and working with Vin Scully. Ladies and gentlemen, our namesake, Charlie Steiner. And I am your moderator, Dave Snell, a graduate of Bradley University. In 1976, and I've already begun my 38th year of broadcasting Bradley Braves basketball, and it's great to see some of my students here this afternoon. I'm going to start with, start with John, because these are future sportscasters. The struggle, what you went to get this point in your career, and how you started, and some advice you would give to these youngsters.
Well, it's kind of like Ted Baxter or Ted Knight on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. I started in a small station in a cornfield outside of Kansas City. That part is true. At 16, I walked into the general manager's office in this little bitty shack of a radio station, and Ray Smokey Beckwith was the general manager. He was smoking a cigar. And I said, you have an opening and I'm going to do sports for you. And he literally fell out of his chair laughing. He thought it was the funniest thing that happened that day. He said, all right, studio in there, there's some copy on the AP wire. Put together a 5-minute sportscast. If it's any good, I'll throw you on the air that day. And that was on August 21st, 1971, which August 21st is Jack Buck's birthday. So kind of ironic that I ended up working with Jack at CBS and doing Cardinal games. But he aired it, and it only took me about 3 hours to do that 5-minute sportscast, where I was quite happy with it. But I was so fortunate that at 16 years old, I took that opportunity. I sold my own programming. I was able to pick up enough advertising to get 2 years worth of sportscasts. So for my junior and senior year of high school, I had a sponsor, Fowler Truck and Tractor, who sponsored 7:25 in the morning and 5:25 in the afternoon. I sold advertising. I played records. You know what records are? Vinyl is coming back, and for good reason. It's very, very good quality. But I played the music shows and country all the way to rock and hard rock. We had all kinds of different formats throughout the different day parts of the station, which helped me with my appreciation for music. I put the headsets on, or headphones or in-ear monitors when I get on the plane, and usually wear them all the way until the end of the trips. Without the music, I couldn't make it. And I learned that appreciation by being a disc jockey at the time. I covered a murder trial at the age of 16 in Lafayette County in Lexington, Missouri. I got to know politicians. Ike Skelton was high up in the defense committees for the House of Representatives when he was just a representative in the state of Missouri. And some of the other symposium panels today have talked about making relationships and working through problems and being a good teammate. And I learned that from a lot of people. I remember I got so mad at something that happened when I was working at KSEK, KMRJ in Pittsburgh, Kansas. And I got so mad at something that happened, and Jim Harbaugh, the owner, goes, well, John, you don't really have to work here if you feel that way about the place. And I thought, you know what, you're right, I'll get over it. And that's one place I learned to be a better teammate. And I remember sitting on a plane, on an Eastern Airline plane with Kurt. We were going to Alabama, Birmingham, from Missouri and Alabama, Birmingham back in the day, and making those relationships and meeting those people and working with various coaches and various players. I've been so fortunate, though, that I was heard and I met the right people along the way. And it's those relationships that do make all the difference. And while really wanting to do what I have accomplished over the years, I started at the age of 8 and was lucky enough to get to follow that path. And enough people along the way have helped me. I could not have done it without them. But you start making those relationships right here and now with your instructors, and go out to the stations and the various newspapers and online publications. And so much is opening up in the media right now. But do your best to do your best job of reporting, because there are going to be many, many hundreds of thousands and millions of people along your life who will hear you, read you, or experience what you have to offer, and really want it that badly, where you do what it takes to get that job done. I think you'll be quite successful.
Len, your career and how you made it to this point.
Well, first of all, it's quite an honor to be up here. I do not want to date any of these fine gentlemen, but I hear Charlie graduated in 1971 from Bradley, and your first job was in 1971. I was born on January 21st, 1971. So when I say I grew up a fan of all three of these guys, I actually mean it. But they're all good friends of mine, and I've learned a lot from all of them. But like John, I mean, it was a rather circuitous route to get to where I am today. I was 17 when I got my first radio job, and when I was a teenager, I wanted to be Ernie Harwell. I grew up in the middle of Michigan, and listened to Ernie Harwell and Paul Carey on Detroit Tigers radio, and I thought that would be a really, really great job. And I ended up going to Marquette University, interned my freshman year with the Milwaukee Bucks in their public relations department, got to know a lot of media people, got to get quotes from Jack Sikma and Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas, and Dennis Rodman, Michael Jordan. I mean, it was really the golden era of the NBA. That was very instructive for me as an 18-year-old kid. I continued to do broadcasting at the student radio station at Marquette. Got a producer job at a local radio station outside of college. And then when I graduated from Marquette, I wanted to go the minor league route. I wanted to be a baseball announcer, and I sent out a letter and resume and a tape to pretty much every single and AA team in the country, and there either were no jobs available or I was not considered for any. So I got a lot of rejection letters or flat out was ignored. And at that time, I was offered a job at WTMJ Radio as a producer and a part-time sports talk show host. Took that job, got to know a lot of people with the Milwaukee Brewers, and over the course of the next 5 or 6 years, kind of became a candidate to be a fill-in announcer when Matt Vasgersian started to do some national work. Took a few free weekends, went down and did some minor league innings in Beloit, Wisconsin, in the Midwest League. And 1999 was tabbed to do about 25 games on television. Did that for 3 years while maintaining my full-time radio job at WTMJ. And then in 2002, the Florida Marlins job opened because Dave O'Brien had left for ESPN. Got that job on March 6th, so spring training had already started, and I got the full-time television job with the Marlins. They won the World Series in 2003. 2004 was my third year. I was in between contracts. The Cubs job opened, and after Chip Caray had left, I didn't even apply for the job until a Bradley University graduate, Andy Mazer, gave me a phone call from Chicago and said, "Hey, have you talked to the Cubs?" I said, "No, why?" He said, "Because I'm hearing your name." And I said, "Really?" I had no idea that I would even be considered for the job. So I made a phone call to John McDonough, and within about a half hour, I was basically on a plane the next day, to come up and interview for the job. I was a finalist with Matt Vasgersian, whom I had filled in for in Milwaukee, and Dave O'Brien, whom I had replaced in Florida. So life does come full circle, and from a very early time in the job search, I knew that we were the 3 finalists, and I told the Cubs and WGN, I said, "I really want this job, but you're going to hire someone great no matter what happens." And the 3 of us ended up talking about it. We were all buddies. Dave had time left on his ESPN contract that precluded him from taking the job. Matt had 2 years left on his Padres deal that precluded him from taking the job. I happened to be in the right place at the right time because I had not yet signed my new contract, and I got a 5-year deal with the Cubs. So Dave is now with the Boston Red Sox, the team he grew up rooting for, and does some ESPN work. Matt is kind of the signature voice on MLB Network on their morning show, and does a lot of play-by-play. And this is my 12th year with the Chicago Cubs. So it kind of worked out for all 3 of us, even though at the time it didn't necessarily seem as if that were the case. So I guess the point is, you may take some zigs and some zags when you thought you were going to go in the opposite direction. But most of the experience you get in this business, down the road, you're going to look back and say, that was really helpful and really meant a lot, even though at the time it may not seem that it's exactly what you wanted.
John?
I'm not exactly sure how any of it actually worked out for me. I did grow up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was a big baseball fan, a fan of the San Francisco Giants, who had Willie Mays and Willie McCovey, Orlando Cepeda, Juan Marichal. They were all Hall of Famers, great players, some of the great players all time in the game. You really could hardly help but be a fan. The broadcasters for the Giants are both in the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons. And the big rivals were the Dodgers and the Giants and the Dodgers back in the 60s when I was a kid. Always seemed to be in a pennant race with each other. The Giants all too often finished second to the Dodgers. But we used to listen to the Dodger games at night. The Giants played mostly day games at home in those days at cold, windy Candlestick. And the Dodgers played almost all night games at Dodger Stadium. And they were on a very powerful station in LA, KFI. So in September, the Giants had their game, and then it was always critical as to how the Dodger game would come out that night. So we'd tune in to Vin Scully. And I always remember as a 10-year-old, Russ Hodges with the Giants, when the Giants had hit a home run, Russ would say, "Tell it bye-bye, baby." And you get goosebumps. And Lon Simmons, who also had a great voice, he'd say, "Tell it goodbye." So, Giants fans, you just live for bye-bye baby or tell it goodbye. And then I heard Vin Scully and the Dodgers hit a home run and it's, away back and she's gone. and I remember thinking to myself as a 10-year-old, like, well, no wonder he's working in a jerkwater town like LA. I mean, that's it? That's all he's got? He's never going to get out of that town. That is the one thing I was right about as a 10-year-old. He's still in LA. But as a kid, I loved the game so much. And the daily games were just not enough for me. And it was a radio game. The Giants only televised the games in LA. That was it. And otherwise, it was only a radio game. And I bought a tabletop baseball game called Stratomatic Baseball. Okay. And in those days, before computers, there was a card for every player. You rolled the dice. The idea is if you replayed the previous season, all the stats and the pennant races should come out about the same. I used to love to play that game, and I used to broadcast the game. So there I was as a 9 or 10-year-old rolling these dice. Here's the pitch to Mays. Base hit. The right fielder, number 9, Roger Maris. Number 9. Dun, dun, dun. And I did the ball. I was the public address announcer. I was the organist, and it was kind of an odd sight as I look back at it. If somebody were to walk into my room, and there I was. And I remember we had moved into a new house, and friends of my mother would come by to have a look at the house, and she'd show them around. They'd walk into my room, and I'd be sitting there, and her friends would always say, "What's he doing?" And my mother was always asthma. He'll be fine. So somehow, somewhere in there, in the midst of my Stratomatic fantasy world, I guess that's where I started. And
Tell us about when you were 11, John.
Then the following year, but I did get a job. I went to college, which was sort of astonishing to me looking back now. And they had a radio station, a TV station, and so I got to do games and go on the air and whatnot. And I got hired by a small TV station in Santa Rosa, California, Channel 50, and did everything for them. And then the Oakland Athletics, who were owned by a guy named Charlie Finley, they were the best team in baseball. They'd won 2 straight World Series. Charlie hired a new broadcaster every year, and then he hired me. I was 22 years old, and all of a sudden I'm working at home for the best team in baseball. And they won the World Series that year, and I was one of the youngest baseball broadcasters ever. And the one record I still hold, as I believe, is true. The following year, just before the start of spring training, Charlie Finley fired me, just like he fired everybody else. So I was 23, and I am, without question, the youngest baseball broadcaster ever to be fired from a big league job. So I may have that record forever. But anyway, that's sort of how it all started for me. And whether there's anything usable in there for anybody else, I kind of doubt.
The lifeblood of any athletic program is the ability to recruit. You have recruited very well.
Thank you. For me, on September the 1st, 1967, how old were you, Len? I arrived on campus. I grew up in New York. And as a child, like everybody here, I caught the bug early. I was 7 years old, 1956. And I'm an elementary Brooklyn Dodger fan. And again, the New York baseball and basketball were the two lifeblood sports, but baseball in particular, because you had the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Yankees. And where I grew up on Long Island, everybody was a Dodger fan. And my mom had this radio about this big, about as big as a microwave is today, in the kitchen. And on the radio came the sound of this voice from heaven of Vin Scully. And you hear the crack of the bat, the sound of the crowds screaming, and it caught me. It's all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to be the Brooklyn Dodgers announcer. At the age of 8, they moved. My career path was already stymied. You were 23 and screwed. I was 8. But I always knew what I wanted to be. And unlike you with Stratomatic, because I don't think it had been invented yet, I would go downstairs on this big old black and white television set, and there'd be 2 or 3 games a week to be televised on Channel 9. And I would turn the sound down, and I would scream my full head off, just like your parents said, "Oh, geez, what's wrong with asthma?" Me, my parents would be upstairs making a meal and telling the neighbors, "Psychotic." I got through it. So when I arrived here, September 1st, 1967, after having spent that summer at Haight-Ashbury, summer of love, I show up, not the prototypical baseball broadcaster, but with hair down to here. I dropped off my my bag, a duffel bag on the bed, and I realized across the street, I was in Wyckoff Hall, Wyckoff 217, that the radio station was in the student center. And I just walked in, I said, "Hi, boys and girls, I'm gonna be here for the next 4 years." I didn't do particularly well, I was there 4.5. But it kept me out of the Army, so it was a pretty good push for me. And why does one come from New York to Peoria? Well, there were 2 reasons. You had Peoria or Phnom Penh. I opted for Peoria. And secondly, Bradley had just a wonderful national perennial basketball powerhouse, and I thought, well, maybe I can call a few games here. And that's what happened. Over the ensuing many, many years, I started after the college station, WRBU, which was carrier current, which was basically pieced together on wire threads into the various dorms. I worked at WIRL and covered the city council. I did everything you could possibly do, played some records, read news, occasionally a sports score or 2. Then to Davenport, Iowa, where I got my first sports job, doing mostly news, but I had a 5-minute sportscast in the afternoon. Steiner's Slanted Sport Shorts. Whoa, big. Yeah. And then to New Haven. And shortly after I got to New Haven, I was 23 years old at the time, as a newscaster. The station had just been, the management had turned over, and would you like to be the news director? Well, I took a couple of courses at Bradley, I'm ready. But there were 13 people in this department. This is in the old days when there were news departments and all of that. A couple of years later, I'm asked to go to Hartford, thankfully by the Hartford station, not the New Haven station. And shortly after that, the station changed format from top 40 to all news. Now suddenly at 25, I'm running an all news station. Well, this is pretty great. But I still wanted to do baseball. A couple of years go by, 3 years in fact. I'm offered a job in Cleveland to run the all news radio station there, WERE, and they needed a sportscaster, so I hired me. And barring a schizophrenic breakdown, we got along well with management. From Cleveland then to New York, and while in Cleveland they started throwing me on television a little bit. I did some commentaries. Then I'm hired in New York, and fortuitously I'm working at an FM station, WXLO. The big station in New York was WOR, which was like GN or KMOX. It was the dominant station in town. A fellow named Don Crickey had moved over to another station. There I am. I'm hired to do this big morning show every day. And RKO had then established a radio network. Bang, suddenly I'm running a sports department out of New York with a recently retired head coach named John Madden, Tony Bruno, who was a pretty good talk show host in his day, and a fellow named Keith Olbermann, who I hired when he was 21 years old, and we are friends to this day. But again, I always wanted to do the Dodgers, and I was kind of getting there. Out of the blue, ESPN calls after I had been let go at WABC with a long period of time on my contract. Would you come up and audition? And I asked John Walsh, who's in the audience and was in the last battle, exactly what would you like me to do? He said, Sports Center. I said, I don't know anything about television. Well, come up. Lo and behold, I had a terrific run at ESPN, but I always wanted to do baseball. In '98, ESPN secured the rights to Sunday Night Baseball on the radio. Thankfully, I was able to get that job. And through 4 years doing that, the Yankees and the Giants, in 2000, after the 2001 season, I had competing offers from the Yankees and the Giants. My father was in health in New York. I thought, well, it'd be nice for him to hear me down the stretch, which he did. But I always wanted to do the Dodgers. 3 years into the Yankee deal, it was up. I get a call from the Dodgers, truly out of the blue. Would you like to come work for the Dodgers? Not exactly enhancing my negotiating posture. My first words were, fuck it, hey, Bubba. And as that was going on, I'm trying to explain to my mom, who at that time was 92, and there was conjecture, would I continue with the Yankees? If not, where to? And I told her, I'm not going to negotiate. I'm not going to explain the negotiations to you, but when it's over, you're all set. 6 months earlier, my father had passed away in the house in which I grew up, where I listened to the Dodger games. Now I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to tell my mother, whose husband, my father, had passed away 6 months earlier, that I'm moving to Los Angeles? Do you think that's easy? So I come home one day, I said, Mom, the deal's done, I'll tell you all about it. I said, so I'm trying to think, all right, what team did I root for when I was a kid? And she said, oh, the Brooklyn Dodgers. That's good. All right, step one. 2, what was the first ballpark Pop took me to? Oh, Ebbets Field. 3, do you remember the announcer I wanted to be like? She couldn't remember his name. I said, Vin Scully. She said, oh, good. When do we move to Los Angeles? As I am explaining this story to her, in this little living room 15 feet from where the radio that I used to listen to, phone rings. Look down, it's a 323 number. Charlie, it's Vin. I want to welcome you to the Dodger family. I said, Mom, I got to take this call. And in that 2 or 3 minute period of my life, you know, it was personal, it was professional. The guy that I always wanted to be is now welcoming me to the Dodger family. And I get a little emotional when I think about it, because that was one of those signature moments of my life. And 12 years later, now heading into 13, having spent time with, I think we can all agree, the Babe Ruth of our industry, best who's ever done it. And this was his last year. And then this past season in September, hosting the big ceremonies in front of 55,000 at Dodger Stadium, live television, radio. It was like it all came home. So, and talk about coming home. I'm here, and I will shut up now and let other people talk.
I'm going to ask one more question of these guys, and then I'm going to open it up. I remember when I graduated from Bradley, I worked with the Phoenix Suns for a year and had a chance to meet Chick Hearn.
A Bradley guy.
A Bradley guy. And I said, you know, in play-by-play, how do you prepare for a game? And he said, the way that works for you. Preparation is the lifeblood of what we do. I'll start with you. Preparation. How much time? Obviously, you have a lot of time on the road.
I have a lot of time at home too. I mean, it's an 8-hour-a-day job once you get to the ballpark, but you prepare for that 8 hours. In the morning, typically, I get up 8:30, 9 o'clock, and back in the old days, go through the newspapers. Now you go through the internet, and I'm not necessarily looking for stats. I'm looking for stories, things, anecdotes in which Rick Monday and I can kind of play off one another. It's more story ideas. And so when there is that given moment in a game where, aha, maybe I thought about it 2-3 days ago, it's in. So for me, it's more, and we were talking in the last panel about being storytellers. And Vin is, again, the best who's ever done that. And so numbers certainly are part of the game, but I don't think you can drown yourself in statistics. But what's funny, what's interesting, and what over the course of 3.5, 4.5 hours of banter. Two guys watching a game with the action such that it is. Again, the crack of the bat until the completion of the play is maybe 2-3 seconds. It's the rest of the time that you try to be as interesting, relevant, and as entertaining as possible.
John, how about your prep?
In the old days, it was trying to go through the newspapers, and when I did the games in Boston, when I did the Red Sox games, we had the Boston papers, and we had the USA Today had come into being sometime in there, and you'd get the 3 New York papers would come in, and so you'd have 7, 8 newspapers a day that you could go through, and the Yankees were the big rival for the Red Sox, so keeping tabs on the Yankees was very important to keep up. And they were very controversial. They had George Steinbrenner, and he was always battling with his players, and there was always controversy coming out of the Bronx in those days. And so you had a way to keep up with what was going on outside of your own ball club. In Boston, at the Boston Globe, they had Peter Gammons. And Peter Gammons knew everything about everything going on in baseball. And his Sunday column, even after I left Boston and moved on to Baltimore, I knew the out-of-town newsstands in every city. In those days, the Sunday Boston Globe would come into most cities maybe on a Tuesday or a Wednesday at the latest, because you had to have access to Peter Gammons' Sunday column. The Globe gave him almost an entire page just for all of the news from all around baseball and Peter's takes on everything. And it was great to read, extremely well written, and you could not be without it. So we have access to all those kind of things now on the internet, but in those days, that's the way you got it done. And I moved on to Baltimore. We had the Washington Post and the Baltimore papers, the Philadelphia papers, the New York papers. So I was grabbing about 10 papers a day, and these papers all stacked up in my house. My wife, the kids are like, "What? Why do you?" Most people can read one paper. They're fine, but you just wanted to. I wanted to feel like I was up on everything. The big problem with the internet, for me personally, and I don't know, maybe you guys the same thing. There was so much information. I get on the computer at 10 in the morning, and I get this info from that city, and then this info from that city, and then move on to another. And then all of a sudden I'm looking, it's like, oh my God, it's 3 o'clock. I got to get dressed and go to the ballpark. And I realized that's all I'm doing. There's no end to the information that's available. So I had to sort of learn how to go after what was maybe relevant that would be helpful for the broadcast at night, because there was just so much of it. But I think having that info about everything that's going on in the sport is crucial, because you're on the air for 3 hours and you have all that time to fill. And ideally, you go into the game with the hope that the game itself will be so great, so compelling, so interesting, that you won't have time to use any of that stuff, to just do justice to the game and stay on top of it. But if the game starts to lag a little bit, or you get a blowout or whatever, then you've got access to all this other stuff.
Glenn?
I actually just wanted to make a couple of comments. The common threads are really interesting, and knowing all these guys like I do. But John and I kind of started around the same time doing similar things when we were in high school. The tabletop game, doing the announcing, I did that between the ages of probably 12 and 15, exactly what you did, John. Charlie, you were at a much higher profile than I was along the way, but our career paths are very similar in that we kind of covered everything, but we always wanted to do baseball. So to get at the preparation part of the conversation, I remember going to high school, and in the morning I'd get to school an hour before the first class, just so I could go to the library and read USA Today, and I would go through each team-by-team capsule. In Major League Baseball, I would look at the stats. So baseball was always something, even when I wasn't working in the business, I felt like I followed on an everyday basis. And I believe the best in the game, and to really want to do baseball every day, you got to love the sport, because there is so much information out there. So I was online this morning looking at baseball news. There wasn't a lot of it, but there was some. My wife can tell you on Thanksgiving and on Christmas Day, on New Year's Day, I'll be firing up the laptop just to see if anything's going on. I don't take a day off from my job, so to speak, because it's fun and I don't want to miss anything. So to really, I think other sports are not quite like our sport. I added it up. I did, I think, 30 spring training games, and I did all the regular season games. When I'm not on TV, I do a little radio. I did 209 baseball games this year. That's not bragging. It's just that's what we do. And that's why I don't do anything in the off season. I don't do any other sports. I've got a 15-year-old at home, and I want to make sure that I don't miss his entire childhood. But when you're doing 200 games in the same sport, you better really like it.
And you're really tired at the end of the
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
John?
The preparation, I think, begins as kids. And it's just what Lynn was saying, following the sport from the time that you remember your first baseball game, or going to your first NBA game or NFL, or even your first experience of high school sports. I think that's where it started. But I've been able to learn a lot from those I've worked with, and I've been so fortunate. When I went to work at CBS Radio doing Game of the Week, I had spent 2 years in Oklahoma City, 2 years in Louisville doing minor league baseball, and then worked for about 6 months at KMOX when I got kicked upstairs to work with Kurt Gowdy and Jack Buck and Bill White and Jerry Coleman, and what a great learning process that was. But to see how they prepare, and they prepare in many different ways. As those announcers got older, their preparation was going down on the field or reading the newspapers or just talking with friends of theirs and incorporating the stories that they had in the backs of their minds. Was it Ross and Rizzo on the ball that went out of Ross's glove into Rizzo's mitt? First thing I thought of was Bob Boone and Pete Rose against
absolutely.
Kansas City
I screamed
in
it out in my living room when it
1980.
happened.
1980, and it's banking away moments like that, whether it be something that happened in a regular season game. And I remember in '97 with the Indians and with the Marlins in the World Series, a catcher happened to get hit in the groin with a foul ball and was down on his knees gasping for air. And Vin Scully said, it reminded me of the time when I think it was Ebbets Field, when a catcher was hit in the groin and he was on his knees and the organist started playing On the Street Where You Live. How appropriate. Or Carlton Fisk had that thing happen to him. Tom Paciorek and I were working together. Fisk gets to his feet. He stumbles out to the mound to talk to the pitcher. And I said, Tom, what could he possibly be saying to his pitcher? Why don't you get that ball down? I've had some great analysts to work with. But at home, I tend to get to the ballpark a little bit later. On the road, I'm there sometimes 4 hours before a game. I work with Rick Horton on the road games. Mike Shannon and Mike still does the home games. And my responsibilities aren't quite as much on the home games because Mike interviews Mike Matheny. And I work about an hour, hour and a half on my lineup card every day. I put so much information, numbers, and things on that lineup card. I do it on an Excel spreadsheet and print it out. I don't use a tenth of it during a game. But it's there, and I know what I put down, and it's my security blanket for doing a game.
I've seen your card. It's pretty intense.
And sometimes I look at it going, I did that.
You know, when you were talking about getting hit in a place no man should be hit, whenever somebody is hit where no man should be hit, Rick Monday inevitably says the trainer might as well bring a paintbrush.
All right, let's throw it open to questions for our panel.
This is more directed towards Charlie Steiner and Len Casper, but it took a while for you guys to get to the position that you have now. Like, what kind of attrition and patience did you guys utilize to get the position that you wanted to?
Go ahead, Charlie.
Well, you know, I didn't even make it to Sports Center till I was 39, so I was hardly an overnight success. Again, Peoria, Davenport, New Haven, Hartford, Cleveland, 10 years in New York, and then Sports Center. But each step got me closer. I guess patience more than anything else, and some degree of confidence that if these opportunities would present themselves, I'd not screw them up too badly. And that was basically it. Patience, not being fearful of rejection, and just, I guess, self-belief that, you know, maybe I can do this thing after all. And in a horribly fortuitous way for me. 2001, I'm still at ESPN and doing the Sunday night games on radio, and John and Joe were doing the television. Then, of course, 9/11 happens. And I am, like everybody else, what do we do? ESPN asked me to do the first Monday night game back in Philadelphia, the Braves and the Phillies. That was the 17th. 5 days later, we're in New York doing that first Met game back. And then a couple of days later, the first Yankee game back. All the while, 2001 was when Barry Bonds was going after the 73 home runs that he would eventually hit. And so I was doing the last 12 to 15 games of the Giants season. I called his 60th through his 73rd home run, I think it was. 68 through 73. Now all of a sudden I'm everywhere. And it's like, whoa. The Yankees called, the Giants called. I had competing offers. John and I talked about it before it all happened. But I took
I
the Yankee
recommended
job.
that he go to the Yankees.
Gee, thanks. And so that was it. It was just a matter of patience, serendipity, and whatever talent I was given. I guess patience and self-belief is probably the big thing.
It's funny, and I don't know if you guys have done this much, but a year or two ago, I had some old VHS tapes. I think I was just cleaning out the basement. And I think we had one VCR left, and I thought, okay, I've got some of the tapes from my first big league broadcast almost 20 years ago. I popped one in, and within 90 seconds, I wanted to shoot the television.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I literally said to myself, I will never, ever do that again. I threw all the tapes away. And I've had conversations with colleagues of mine, and I know you're supposed to view yourself 20 years prior through that prism, but when you do what we do for a living, you're going to view it through your ears now. And I heard all the bad stuff. I heard all the mistakes, and I literally thought to myself, why did they hire me? Yeah. I was so bad. But I wasn't as bad as I think I thought I was, and I'm probably not as good now as I think I am now. But the point of it is that I was 28 when I did my first Major League game, and my singular goal was to do one game. And then I did one game, and of course, when I finished, I said, I want to do this every day. I think that when you start and you have this dream of doing something, and then you get a taste of it, and then there's the thought that you might not do it again. And it sounds so quaint now to say at 28, I thought I would never have a chance to do it again. But when you're in that moment and you don't know what the future holds, you do think, I might never get a chance to do it again. I applied for the Brewer full-time job when Matt Vasgersian left for San Diego, and I was beaten out by Darren Sutton before 2002. I then applied for Darren's job in Anaheim, radio job, finalist there, didn't get it. And at that point, I'm 31, thinking, I will never do another Major League game in my life, right? And so looking back now, that sounds kind of foolish to think, but that's how I felt. Then the Marlins job just fell out of the sky. So I'm sure Charlie, I'm sure John and John could tell you there are moments in your career where you feel like, that's it, or I don't really like this, and all of a sudden something happens and you go, oh, I'm really glad I didn't get that opportunity because then I wouldn't have had this opportunity. So you just kind of go with the flow, you try to do the best work you can, and you treat people well, and I really believe this, the jobs you have that you don't love, that feel like stepping stone jobs, really strive to do those jobs well, because if all you're thinking about is the next job, you're going to screw that one up, and the person you're working for might not then down the road say, hire this person, because when he or she worked for me, 5 years ago that gave me the greatest effort ever, even though I knew he or she didn't want to do that for the rest of their lives. That's really important to live in the moment in this business.
Bradley grad Jim Kelch, 17 years
Yeah.
in AAA. Could have given up. Now he's with the Reds team. He finally made it.
Absolutely.
I mean,
And somewhere along the line, you're going to look back at those jobs and think, that was too much fun and not enough money. But it was fun.
Yes.
Hey, when I got fired at 23, and I was trying to get back into baseball, and I really thought, man,
Trying to get back into baseball at 23.
23.
Seriously.
I'm trying to get back into baseball.
What a touching comeback.
Well, but at the time, I thought, wow, my career's already peaked. I'm on the downward slide.
Right.
I mean, 6 months from now, they'll be pulling me out of a gutter somewhere. I ended up, and I didn't get back into baseball. I ended up broadcasting soccer, the North American Soccer League. Remember? and I'd never even heard a soccer game broadcast. And the team was owned by Yugoslavia. It was still called Yugoslavia at that time, by a guy from Belgrade, and he had a bunch of players from Belgrade. And I'm learning how to pronounce all these, Momčilo Gavrić and Selimir Milosevic and Mirko Liverić and Ilija Mitic and so on and so forth. And when the games were over, we'd have a star of the game interview. And, Momčilo, you scored the winning goal, a minute to play. Tell us what happened down there. Well, John comes over for the ball. Yeah. Comes for the, we say, rot podborodek paski kolik, you see? That's pretty much the way we saw it up here. Then for the stretch run, we had a chance to win. I was the voice of the San Jose Earthquakes, and Earthquakes voice, whatever. And we got a guy from Scotland, apparently a legendary player from the Glasgow Celtic in Scotland named Jimmy Johnston, and they threw him in a plane in Glasgow. He flew across the world to San Jose, landed an hour before game time. They raced him over to the stadium, threw him in a uniform. He met all of his teammates just before kickoff of the field, and he scores the winning goal with a minute to play. And they bring him up for the post-game interview. I'm very excited. He's from Scotland. He speaks English. And I said, Jimmy, you scored the winning goal with a minute to play. Tell us what happened down there. Well, John, you kind of get your boot in there. I can't tell you, kind of hesitate. No. Well, Jimmy, that's pretty much the way we saw it up here. But the next year I still did not get back into baseball, and I did the soccer again. And the funny thing was, I got hired by CBS to do the soccer championship game, so a national telecast. I was so poor. The game was in Seattle. I found out when I arrived at the hotel in downtown Seattle that I was going to have to pay for the hotel myself and bill CBS. And I was like, how much is this? And I was afraid I probably would not have enough on my credit card, my one and only credit card, to actually be allowed to stay at the hotel. But anyway, they worked it out, and I was able to do it. So then I enjoyed it. I got hired. I moved to Washington, D.C., did the games there, and then Eddie Einhorn, one of your old bosses, he had a network called TVS, and he made a deal with the soccer network. Now, all of a sudden, I'm doing the soccer game of the week and doing these games in Washington, and I'm thinking, well, this is pretty good. And then I'm doing college basketball in the winter, and I didn't even try to get back into baseball. And then just out of the blue, I get an offer to go to baseball the next year. So I wasn't a total idiot, so I did take it and went back to baseball. But baseball.
You wouldn't take away the soccer part of your life or anything, right?
Well, it was good because I realized that you need to be able to do more than just one thing. You want to do baseball.
Absolutely.
And Charlie did all these other things, and he had to be really good at it to get those jobs. And so he did that. I mean, to be as versatile as possible, I think, is very important. And so that's my recommendation if there's a chance to do anything on the air, do it. Learn how to do it. put the time in, and you'll be that much the better as a broadcaster and more able to keep regular employment, I guess is the main
So if
thing.
you're looking to get into this racket, Woody Allen was asked a million years ago what recommendations he would give to young people trying to get into whatever line of work. Just be there. You knock on a radio station's door, a television station's door, whatever it may be. Here I am. What can I do for you? Because they're not going to call you and say, hey, I've never met you before, but why don't you come over for an audition? It doesn't work that way. So be there, be available, and be willing to do whatever it is they ask you to do. And sometimes you make it, and sometimes you don't. But give yourself the best chance and best opportunity by being ever present.
Yes, sir.
On any given broadcast, you have people listening who are listening for the very first time and some who have listened for decades. How much does or should your audience impact how you broadcast? Do you target a specific audience, or do you just talk and whoever's listening is listening? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, Jack Buck told me the best way to approach it, you are talking to brain surgeons and you are talking to dropouts and everybody in between. So make it as simple as possible. And then if you want to embellish after that or work in catchphrases, one of the first games I did in the big leagues was with Jack and Mike in Cincinnati in 1984. George Hendrick hit a line drive off the left field wall, and I said he had a frozen rope off the wall and drove in 2 runs. The inning came to an end, and Jack looked at me and he goes, "What's the temperature?" I said, "It's about 87, humid. Do you see any ice on the field?" That is not a frozen rope. It is a line drive. Everybody can understand line drive. And if you want to call it a frozen rope in your commentary later, fine, but when you're calling that, be as simple as possible. And that left a pretty good impression on me, and I've tried to live by that, but you don't think about the audience size, whether you're talking to 10 million, 15 million, or 10 or 15 people. I heard Bob Hope say on a small market station, one time he was interviewed, and the guy said, "Well, you've been in the right place at the right time, Mr. Hope, haven't you?" He said, "Yeah, but I showed up." But he also made the point that day to that guy on the 250-watt station. He said, "You do your best job, whether you're on 250 or on a 100,000-watt FM or on a 50,000-watt AM." And Stan Musial always played as hard as he could possibly play. And Joe DiMaggio was the same way, because he didn't know if someone was going to be at the ballpark to see him play for the 1,000th time or for the first time. And he wanted to do the best job he possibly could. I think that's the way to approach about anything you go about.
I think that's great advice, and I would add to be yourself as much as you can, and as you do this more often, your voice will come through. I can tell you these 3 guys, they're the same on the air as they are off the air. Listen to John Miller today. Can't you hear him broadcasting, right? That's because this is who John is. And the last thing you want to do is have a persona on the air that sometimes wavers, and there's a point where people are like, "I don't know who the real Len Casper is. I'm just Len all the time." And I think that as you do this more often, you grow more comfortable in your own voice.
Vin Scully tells a story when he was 20. He was even younger than you, for goodness sake, but he wasn't fired. So he's feeling pretty good about himself. He's working with the legendary Red Barber. He's doing 1 whole inning a game so Red could go to the bathroom. But his life is good. And he feels like he's coming along. And Red Barber calls him aside one day and he says, "Well, Vin, you have something that no other broadcaster has." "Oh, what's that?" "You. That's all you have is you. You be yourself on the air, be yourself off the air. This is what you have. Don't try to be another Red Barber. Don't try to be another John Miller, Len Casper, John Rooney. It's you. Be yourself, and hopefully it's good enough and people will like you enough that you can maintain employment for a while. But if you try to be somebody else, it ain't never going to work." Grammar, Bradley, 2000. Cubs
Mr.
fan?
Zobrist.
Oh, a big Cubs fan. So obviously I listen to you a lot, Len. So I kind of know how you go about this, but with sabermetrics being such a big part of the game now, and WAR and all these things with the computer telling you which players performing well or whatnot. How do you guys value that? How often do you use sabermetrics in your broadcasts?
I don't even know what war means. War. Who? Good God, yo. What's it?
Absolutely nothing.
Say it again. You especially on the radio in particular, you can bury a listener with statistics that just don't mean very much. I'm not in the process of trying to re-sign a guy and what he does against. There's a story to tell. Occasionally there is a statistic that is relevant, but I am of the age where I'll look at the back of the baseball card before I look at WAR and VERP and this and that. Frankly, stuff that I don't understand, and I don't know that it necessarily enhances a game broadcast. That's just me. I'm really old school.
I'm fascinated with the statistics. I like to read the books that come in after the season. I like to see if there's some information maybe that's not so apparent with just the regular statistics. And I believe that the primary value of these statistics, other than that you're a fan and you want to know how your team's going to do, maybe to project how they're going to do, or a gambler who wants to put a bet down, but is building the team for the next year. If you're going to make a trade, is that guy, based on all of your analytics, is he going to be as good in your ballpark as he was in their ballpark? Now that he's a year older, if it's a multi-year contract, is he going to be that good for that many years, and so on and so forth? Those numbers don't really help you in terms of the game that night, I mean, in my opinion. However, when I started, batting average, home runs, RBIs, those were the main things for hitters to explain what kind of a season he was having. And I think that we've seen pretty clearly that the on-base average is a much better indicator than a batting average of the guy's ability to get on base is a much better indicator of how effective he is as a hitter. So I do give that now, where I never used to give that before. And sometimes the guy's hitting 290 and his on-base percentage is 310. So 290 sounds great, 310 sounds terrible. Or his batting average is 260, his on-base average is 370. Well, just the opposite. The batting average sounds kind of pedestrian, but the on-base sounds great. So I think those are relevant, so I try to give those. And periodically, there are these defensive statistics now, the runs saved and all this kind of stuff, especially if it pertains to one of our players or maybe a player on a team that they're playing that night, the opposition. Maybe he's the best in the game statistically as a defensive center fielder. And I think that's very good. You don't have to explain the methodology, how they figure that out. Like I could, of course, personally. I could explain that, yeah. But just to say there's a statistic they keep, and the Giants' second baseman is actually right now saving more runs or covering more ground than any second baseman in the game. Well, I think any fan can understand what you're talking about there. So that becomes relevant to your broadcast. But for the rest of it, I think the stats they're great to read, and they're fun to look at when the season's over. But not that helpful for me on the air. Television, at least you could put a graphic up, and the people can see it. Yeah.
Dirty little secret before John chimes in. Because we see our team every day, every time I'll go into different ballparks, talk to the broadcasters, they always downgrade their own players, and I'm like, well, this guy's having a great year. Yeah, but blah blah. I see every play. He's not as good as you think. What about your guys? Well, this guy's been great. Nah, he had, we all. That's why statistics are good, because I do think it adds an objective level to what we see. Now, this is one of the rare years where I didn't have a lot of bad things to say about the Cubs, because they were really good. But my point is that I think we all probably admit that the overexposure to players on an everyday basis tends to make you downgrade a lot of their talent. And it also makes you, with teams that you don't see very often. You see a guy who has just a great year and 6 games against your team. Wow, this guy, he should be an all-star. He should be the MVP. And the team's broadcaster's going, he's okay. I find that really interesting.
Well, this guy named Tolles comes up to play against the Cardinals for the Dodgers. And I said, Charlie, tell me about this guy. He's just another guy. He gets 4 hits that night, and I go,
There you go.
just another guy, huh? After he drops the ball against the Cubs, he goes, he's just another guy.
But it's true, you know, we see these guys every single day, 162 times during the regular season, 30 or so in preseason, and however long you I did about 193 or whatever it was this year. So you see these guys, and maybe sometimes you do tend to downplay them a little bit, but at the end of the day, and I was talking to some folks yesterday, you are what your record says you are. Either you're good or you're not, and you don't need war and VORP and all this other crap to justify who you're going to believe, me or your lion eyes, is basically what it boils down to. And so, yeah, the statistics on base percentage, totally agree. That is a far less used, valued statistic. But at the end of the day, for 3.5 hours, 4 hours, whatever the time may be, we're trying to be as informative, accurate, as entertaining as possible. And if you start burying folks with just random stats and they're driving on the interstate and they're stuck in traffic, that's the last thing in the world they want to hear on television.
My computer broke down in Baltimore, and I'm trying to boot back up to get the information on my lineup card, and John walks in. He goes, why worry about all that? Why not just tell him he's hitting okay, a few homers, quite a few RBIs, and he steals some bases. There's a ball low and outside. I thought
I'm
that's
always
that's
trying
better
to
than
help.
getting worked up over trying to get this done before first pitch in 10 minutes.
He's got 15 to 20 home runs and 16, 70 RBIs or so.
Having a good
Hitting right around 290, 300, somewhere in there.
It's like Euchre saying, I don't know where this guy was last year, but I'm sure he was great.
Yeah, we were in New York and driving. I was with the Marlins. We had a 3:45 bus, 7:10 game at Shea Stadium. We got on the BQE. We got stuck. We got to the ballpark at 6:30. We had our starting pitcher. We had about 5 of our position players. We had our pregame host. 6:30 was the time that we went on the air. So basically, I showed up and no preparation. Tommy Hutton and I had to do the game very early in my career with the Marlins. And I remember we finished the broadcast that night, and I said, we need to do this more often. It was our best broadcast of the year because we had fun and we weren't looking down at our score sheets. So there is something to be said for over preparation being a problem. And there are times I do want to steal Pat Hughes' scorecard. There are. I won't do it because I know he'd freak out. But there are days where I just would love to just hear him talk and not rely on all the stuff we all rely on.
When I started, and Monty Moore was the guy that I broke in with, and Monty'd been around for a long time, and he had a binder, and he had these sheets for every player on the ball club, and he filled in all the data from that night's game before the next game,
Right.
and then he'd put these sheets, and they were stuff like you used to do your taxes or do the books at a company trying to keep track of the money or whatever. I don't know where the stuff came. I don't use stuff like that. But I thought, well, that's the way it's done, so I'm doing it. And the one year I was doing the Red Sox games, and my wife at the time and I were having a divorce, and so when I'm in town, I'm trying to see the kids and take them out during the day, and I'm living in a separate place. And now it's the middle of May, and I haven't started these sheets yet. And I'm thinking, well, it's going to take me a week now to get that all up to date. And I realized after a while that, well, it's better without them because the hitter's up, it's right in front of me, and that's where my eye would go to, and that's where my mind would go. And so it was giving those stats and giving that information all the time. So I never did it again, and I think it was for the best because now the eye is always on the field and what's going on in the game, and then maybe something that might be a story or an anecdote that might be appropriate to what's happening in the game. So that was my experience on that, and I think it was truly being without that info was for the best. The numbers are the numbers, and I pour through the numbers when the season is over. And when I was a kid, I would pour through the sporting news. The only way you could get all the teams' statistics was weekly in the sporting news. They'd have all the teams team by team stats, and I would pour through that, even though they were already 3 or 4 days old by the time you got them. Now you can get them anywhere at any time. So and anybody can get them. The people listening do not rely on you for those stats. They can get them while we're on the air. They can get them. So so I think that's important. On the radio, it's different than on the television. On the radio, I think you mainly just want to bring the people into the ballpark. Periodic little bits of dead air are very important. Let them hear the crowd. There's the roar of the crowd. Pull back a little bit. Let them hear the roar of the crowd, and paint the picture. Try to make sure you tell everybody this is a right-handed hitter. Maybe how his stance is. How are they playing him? Try to grab the people's attention and bring them into the ballpark, and bring them the game, and tell them what you think they need to enjoy the game that night. And the television is just the opposite, because they can already see it. So you don't have to describe anything.
Right. I think my analogy of radio and television baseball is like tennis. I play a lot of doubles and singles. They're very different games. The strategy is completely different. And all of us have done both. I think there's an assumption among people who don't do it that television's easier. It's different. On radio, the fallback is always, where is the ball? You can have a 12-1 game and you have literally nothing to say. You can describe what you're seeing to the listener. On television, you have a million choices at every moment. You can talk about anything you want because people are watching the game. That can also pose a challenge, because there are times when you pick the wrong thing to talk about, or you start a story right when the inning is ending. So it's different. Radio is more challenging in terms of the vocabulary, being efficient, describing actually what you're seeing.
And giving the score.
And giving the score, right.
Use John's egg timer.
Right. And on television, the canvas is completely blank, so it gives you more time to have fun and also more time to get in trouble, maybe. Shelley.
Stories in the media, especially in Chicago, of a play-by-play guy and his analyst not getting along, being at odds. So the question is, has that happened to you? And if so, how do you deal with that when you have to live with your partner for 6 months?
Well, that never happens.
Never. What's he talking about?
I have no idea. What do you say, Pards? Mercy.
We do spend more time with our broadcast partners than we do with our spouses, I will say that.
Well, somebody asked me, how's Mike Shannon doing? I haven't talked to Mike since the last out of the season. But pretty soon we'll be visiting again and getting ready for the season. And we take that break because we spend so much time together, a lot more time indeed than with our families.
We're on the air, give or take, 650 hours a summer. Every single day. 162 games and 181 days. And we are, Rick Monday and I, who is a dear friend, I've spoken to him once since the end of the season. He sits about where Len is, I sit here, every day. And when we're not that far apart, we're next to one another on the bus. When we're not that close to one another on the bus, we're next to one another on the airplane. And so it sure makes it a whole lot easier when you do get along, and thankfully we do. But in those occurrences where it doesn't happen, you go in, you do your job as best you can, kind of like a couple of jazz musicians riffing, and hope that you can maintain a tune for 3.5 hours and 162 games. But you're really fortunate when you've got somebody that you have to be as close to as we are. When that happens, and it translates on the air as well, I think.
And you have to stay focused. I mean, and you were talking about that, but I think especially if you get a bad game and the season's going on and on, maybe you got in at 4 o'clock in the morning from the previous town, and you tried to sleep a little bit, and then you're at the ballpark again that night, a little sleep deprived, and so on and so forth. But and I told them this story. I was sort of telling a story on myself. I was doing a game in Baltimore, bottom of the 9th inning, And the Orioles are down 5-2. They start rallying. They get a run. It's 5-3. A couple of guys on, and a right-handed hitter named Lee Lacy hits a ball down the right field line, and it hits the foul pole. 3-run homer. The game's over. So it's very exciting. And I say on the air, he hits it deep down the right field line. If it's fair, it's gone. It's hooking. And then I realize, no, he's a right-handed hitter down the right field line. That's not a hook. It's slicing. But you don't want to stop in the middle of the home run and just say, oh, I beg your pardon. I should have said it's slicing. So I just try to immediately correct it. It's slicing, and it's off the foul pole, a home run, then the ball game is over. What a moment. So now on the post-game show, we play the highlights, and I get to the big moment. Then with 2 down, 2 men on, Lee Lacy came to the plate. There's a deep drive down the right field line. If it's fair, it's gone. It's hooking. It's slicing. It's off the foul pole, a home run. The game's over. You know? So now the highlight's over. I come back on. I said, in all my years, I've never seen action on a ball like that.
And you know what, John?
That's kind of the way we saw it.
Did you guys hear was it the Pence homer? You guys, the became viral, the home run call John made this year? What was the call?
Oh, you heard about that?
You remember the call? It's the greatest home run call in the history of our sport. Would you like to describe it, John? It was the greatest recovery in the history of our sport.
The home opener, and it's a very exciting moment. Hunter Pence hits a grand slam, and way back, it's gone, a grand slam for Buster Posey, and I'm like, but somehow I just said, grand slam for Buster Posey's good friend, Hunter Pence. So, and Hunter Pence is very, I mean, he's a really good guy, and he's on Twitter, and he's on Facebook, and he's on Instagram, and on his little bio, he changed all of them to, I'm Buster Posey's good friend, Hunter Pence. He walked up behind Buster in the clubhouse, and Buster's sitting at the couch looking up at another game on the TV, and Pence gets right behind him and takes a selfie. He puts that on the Instagram, and he says, me with my good friend, Buster Posey. And so we had a lot of fun over it, except me, really, because that's the last thing you want to be known for. Is oh, man, when he screws up royally, he really knows how to recover. Yeah. We can't wait for him to have another one of those big screw-ups. The more the better. Yeah.
So we got one more question. Go ahead.
All right, so pace of play is obviously a big issue in baseball right now. What's your guys' opinion, and how does it affect your job of calling the game?
Good question.
My gosh, this guy's taking forever to pitch. Put a clock on it.
Well, we had Pedro Baez. You already know Pedro. Yeah. Pedro Baez, God is my judge, this year in April or May, is out there. He threw 30 pitches in 30 minutes.
Charlie was clean shaven when he came into the game.
I was so exasperated. I said, ESPN has made a documentary series for Pedro Baez. 30 for 30. Now, fast forward into August, and the Cubs were in town, right?
29 and 29.
29 and 29. Yeah. And Jim DeShays doing the game, and Matt Vasgersian, who was doing the game for MLB Network. Between innings, after this 29-pitch, 29-minute epic, DeShays comes in from the booth to our left, Vasgersian to the right. I mean, they were like Radio City Rockettes. They were perfectly timed. They walk into the booth to Monday and me, and they say simultaneously, "What the fuck is going on here?" So the answer to your question is, I have no idea, but they really got to do something about it. I mean, perfect time. Did the Shays come back and tell you about it?
yeah.
They came back from 30, 40 feet away, different booths. They arrived at our booth at the exact same time, and we turn around, and it was one of those priceless moments that I will remember. And what they said to Baez, talk about getting lost in translation. They said, look, when you're out there, when the game comes too fast, let the game slow down and come to you. They didn't mean undress yourself on the field and adjust your belt and your cap. It means slow down and let the game come to you. Finally, he kind of understood it later on in the year, and then it was like 18 for 18 as opposed to 30 for 30.
We give the out-of-town scores when he comes in.
From yesterday.
We can give like 4 or 5 scores, and then there's a ball outside. Anyway, the funny thing happened in that game, and we can tell a minute and a half anecdote before the next pitch is. So it's an opportunity for us.
Yes.
All those anecdotes we stored up. So.
Gentlemen, thank you. I don't know how we can thank you for this hour that flew by. We could do another hour, and it's great. Let's have a great hand for our. What's up, John? Nice job. That was fantastic. Sorry.
Thank you for coming back. Thank you.
In addition to our students, we have broadcasters from all over the state here today, and that's great. So we welcome you to Bradley campus, and the next year, the 3rd Charlie Steiner Symposium. Make sure you come back and bring some friends.
Plenty of good seats still available.
Yeah.